Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today? Thank you for joining us for I think episode 5 of Library Lunch and Learn already. This one is going to be such an exciting day for us. We're talking about management and leadership, and we have wonderful guests for you today. We have a librarian that you're going to hear from. We had two authors scheduled. We are only going to be hearing live from one author. Heather Younger sent a pre-recorded video, but we'll get to that later. But we have wonderful content for you today, inspiring ideas and information that will help you focus your leadership skills at work and pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. There's issues that everybody faces, and we know that leaders and managers need a reminder sometimes, and some encouragement, and some insights from what's going on in the field and what's going on around the whole entire community of librarians. So we are happy that you are joining us today. We are hoping this session is more interactive than some of our past ones. I know our first guest, Elizabeth from the Ferguson Library, who Miriam will introduce in a second, is going to be asking questions of the audience. And so if you will just put those answers in the chat, we will be making sure that the conversation keeps going. So we look forward to your comments today. We look forward to your questions. As a reminder, all of the information will be sent to you in a wrap-up report at the end. So you don't have to feel free to, jot anything down quickly or scribble anything. We will be sending all of the information to you after. And we are always available for questions if you need us. We are at library@penguinrandomhouse.com. So I won't take up any more of your time. Miriam, why don't you just introduce yourself really quickly and then get us started. But thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you learn a lot from this leadership and management session. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Library Lunch and Learn. We're so pleased that you joined us today. It is my privilege to introduce a beloved colleague in library land. Elizabeth Joseph began her library career at the Yonkers Public Library after graduating from the City College of New York with a baccalaureate in English Literature and Latin American Studies. Her professional journey took her to the New York Public Library and other library systems in New York before she settled into a remarkable career at the Ferguson Library in Connecticut, where she now serves as Associate Director of Community Engagement. Elizabeth earned her master's degree in library science from Queens College. She has served on multiple ALA and PLA committees and is currently co-chair of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association Mentoring Committee. She's active locally, serving on the Connecticut Civic Health Advisory Board, Stamford Pride, and other organizations. Elizabeth was named Library Journal's Mover and Shaker in 2015 for her work with local entrepreneurs during the last economic recession, and she was on the external jury panel for 2021's esteemed list of movers and shakers. Please welcome Elizabeth Joseph. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Right, yes, I'm unmute. Thank you, Miriam and Kelly, for this great opportunity, and it's really important sort of part of our work and our lives that I would like to talk about today. I was really inspired by Heather Younger, who you'll hear about and hear from a little bit later, and this presentation is really sort of comes out of what I learned from her book. So today I'm going to be talking about self-care and self-love, and I'm going to talk about both these aspects from a dual perspective, one as an employee and one as a leader who's very much inspired by servant and caring leadership. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of talk in the media and in our culture about self-care and self-love. Finally, I think we've reached a point where the importance and significance of self-care and self-love is finding a place in our culture. I was sort of really moved by a quote from Audre Lorde, who talked about self-care not being a luxury or self-indulgent, but it's really an act of survival for so many of us. What what are the things that led to the phenomenon of self-care and self-love? What is it about our culture that makes self-care and self-love a critical part of our well-being and health? How can we as individuals practice self-care? How can we as leaders foster self-care in our employees? So these are some of the things that I will be talking about today. A lot of this is just from my own experience, working here and talking to my colleagues. And I hope that you'll find this presentation interesting. During the presentation, I'll be posing a lot of questions, and these are not rhetorical questions by any means. What I would really like is for you to respond to them. So please use the chat function, use emojis, whatever you need to respond and express your thoughts. Next slide. There's no denying that COVID played a huge role in generating awareness and the need for self-care. Right? I think that in the past year and a half that we have been inundated with information. There's a barrage of conflicting and contradictory reports about the virus, about the variants. No one has escaped having someone that has not been affected by COVID, either through death or illness. There is a social distancing aspect that kept us away from our friends and family for so long. And then lo and behold, there's the vaccine, which everyone thought was going to be the panacea, but it really wasn't. All of these has had a crippling effect on our emotional lives. I think many of us cannot deny that we're not overwhelmed and exhausted by all of this. But I think as public library workers, we knew we had to serve our communities and get ourselves to work every day. Next slide. The violence against the BIPOC community is not new or rare, right? The fragility of our lives this past year and a half has really forced us to confront issues such as police brutality, anti-Black, anti-Asian, anti-immigrant sentiments. We became a part of a collective awakening and reckoning around race, inequity. We were moved to really unpack the history that makes up this country. Some of us were asked to be play roles such as experts and storytellers, and we're told to be resilient and strong, even though there's just so much hopelessness around us. How much energy and will does it take to carry the burden of yourself, your family, your friends, your community, and last but not least, our place of work? Next slide. How many of you have heard some of these terms? The hustle, the grind culture, the pursuit of perfection, yes, and lean in. If we are to examine our work culture, all of these terms have become a part of our lexicon, right? It really is it's a moment that really defines our current times. We're all striving, I think, as people to be better, to be more successful at work, be more successful in our homes, in our communities. We are constantly aiming higher to make more money, to get a better job, to get a higher status, get a better vacation or a bigger home. I think as librarians who are leaders in our community, we're always at the forefront, right? We always want to say yes, and we always want to climb uphill battles and bring results that really make a difference. But if we take a minute and step back, what gets lost in that uphill climb? What happens when you constantly volunteer yourself and step ahead in front of all of these needs and demands? Next slide. So putting work and careers aside and all the society and external things that are going around us, what about our own lives outside of work? How many of you juggle multiple roles? How many of you are mothers and daughters and wives and partners and friends? And how many of you and please use the chat function to answer some of these questions. How many of you work late frequently to do programs or finish a project? How many of you come in early to finalize a grant application or a report? How many of you will come into work even though you have a cold, or you're feeling lethargic, or you have a pestering headache? How many of you volunteer to take on projects outside of work, in your community, in your schools? And this is an example that I'm like quite familiar with, which is how many of you do your laundry, make dinner, and help your kid with their homework? I think that we have all learned at this point that multitasking on the surface might mean that you're doing so many things, accomplishing all of these tasks, but we really know, and we have found out, that it really decreases productivity and accuracy. What happens when we never take time for ourselves, for our minds, and for our bodies? Next slide. How do you practice self-care? I follow Mary Frances Winters, who is the CEO of an organization called the Winters Group. She's a master strategist and has done a lot of work recently on EDI issues, organizational development. And she has a blog, which I follow religiously. And what she said recently in this week's blog is that we're all learning that pressing on and pushing through may not be the best way to handle the adversities we face. We must set boundaries for our well-being and not feel guilty about taking care of ourselves. You have to find your secret practices that bring you peace and joy, and do take good care of yourself. I think Mary Frances Winters really has done a lot of training around emotional work, and she's written some great books such as Inclusive Conversations and Black Fatigue. And I think that so many of us that play multiple roles and take on so much never think about themselves, right? Because they are caring leaders, or because they are mothers and wives and partners and volunteers in their community. So it's really important that you stop for a minute and think about yourself. Next slide. Last year, I think at the end of last year, American Libraries published a really great article. It's called The Weight We Carry. So if you have read that article, I thought it was really just an incredible article. And I also found it to be really eye-opening, because for someone who is pretty aware, I had never fully realized that emotional stress and trauma is not just what happens to yourself or what happens in your own life. It's really, it comes at us from everywhere. So if anyone takes public transportation or lives in large urban areas where homelessness is rampant, I think you will know that like you are faced with trauma as soon as you wake up, because you know that your trip to work is not going to be a pleasant one. But it also comes at us from our coworkers, our patrons, who really might be suffering through something that we will find ourselves being aware of. I think this past year, I have found myself going home feeling very defeated and accomplished, because what has happened this year with COVID, so many people have lost jobs. Now there is the imminent possibility of home evictions. We have spent the last couple of months really working with so many of our patrons who have been filing unemployment, having trouble filing unemployment, people facing eviction and needing all this paperwork and documentation, dealing with all the technology stress. All of that will take a toll on you. I mean, you might not believe it, and that toll really manifests itself in several different ways that you might come to terms with, you might identify as trauma for yourself. The other thing I've also recognized this past few months is that libraries have always known to be sort of centers for people facing trauma, and libraries become a place where people who have been failed by other social structures and institutions, and then librarians are, of course, quasi social workers. I think it's really sort of interesting that libraries were at the forefront of serving people who had emotional and social problems, but we are very slow to like do something about our staff, right? I mean, I think that it's just sort of interesting that libraries have not really moved forward in bringing in self-care practices into our workplaces. Next slide. Mental health, self-care wheel. This is something that I've been really thinking about, and we've shared this with our staff. It's really about creating some things, both micro and macro activities that we can use to tend to our bodies, to our souls, and to our minds. So I think that a lot of people I know sometimes sit at their desk and eat lunch and never take the opportunity to go outside for a walk or things like that. So those micro activities can really make a difference. And then there's a lot of macro activities that one might also pursue in order to like find wellness and joy in their own lives. I think it's really important that we not just sort of think about our physical health, but we also think about our emotional, psychological, and spiritual health. I think, and spiritual doesn't necessarily have to be a religious experience, but it could just be something that sort of takes you out of a stressful situation. Next slide. What can we do as leaders? As leaders, we're entrusted with the well-being of our employees. What we say, how we do it, who we are, matters to our employees more than we know. We know that our employees look to us as guides and examples. Next slide. So as someone in middle management, I'm particularly attuned with like the issues surrounding middle managers, because as we all know, middle managers have to serve more than one master, right? I mean, they're serving their bosses, they're serving the employees, they're under their care. And also, I think as a librarian, I always tell people that I just don't report to people at work. I report to everybody in the community, because a lot of people will come to us and say, well, we need this, or we should do a program on this. So it's really important for people who are in middle management to take, I don't know, just a few more minutes of self-care, because they are really under so much more pressure to navigate uncertainty and conflict. And I think that it just makes it really a much more precarious situation for them. So, so middle management, if you're a middle management, make sure that you're also really practicing self-care. Next slide. Modeling behaviors and habits. I think that as children look to their parents as sort of examples to follow, I think in the same way, employees look to their leaders as an example of success. So if you are a leader that never takes vacation or constantly works evenings and weekends, I think if an employee is looking to be someone who is a leader or a director, they're going to emulate you and those toxic behaviors. So I think that that's something to be mindful of. I'm going to refer to Simon Sinek a little bit later, but Simon Sinek really sort of coined the whole idea around your why, right? What is your why and what is their why? I think leaders need to articulate and really just announce what their why is. Why did they become a librarian? Why did they want to be a leader? What is it that motivates them? And sort of on the same token, it's really important that employees articulate that their why, and both parties know what motivates them. Because I think that when we're all aware of what our whys are, we can really have a more genuine connection and collaboration around a shared vision. Last but not least is the whole idea of flexibility, because many of us work in union environments. All of us have staff manuals that really offer procedures and policies. But I think what's really important is to really have humanity dictate how we interact with our staff, right? If someone asks for a day off, like, they should not be pressured to say, well, I need to have a day off because of X. I think if someone needs a mental day off, like, they should not have to say, well, they should not really have to reveal those personal reasons. I was on LinkedIn the other day, and someone had shared their experience where they wanted to attend a funeral of a friend of the family, and being from a certain ethnic background, this person said, well, everybody that all the elders that their family knows are all uncles and aunts, but people really did not, like, their boss did not want to approve that funeral day because they couldn't really prove the relationship. I think those kind of things really need to be kept in mind, because at the end of the day, like, we need to treat each other as human beings and as equals. And so sensitivity and care there, I think, is important as well. Next slide. So every organization, I think, has probably realized that their biggest asset is their employees. I think as leaders, we need to be genuine and authentic in our exchange, because if you're not, your employees are going to know that. And I think that's going to be the foundation of that relationship. It's important to go beyond pleasantries, and which many times do feel superficial. I think it's important for leaders to understand sacrifices that people make to achieve work goals, because a lot of times staff members who excel at something and produce great results, I think it's fine to congratulate them in person or in public, but I think what's even more important is the layer beyond that. Like, what did the staff member have to give up in order to get there, right? And I think no one seems to stop and recognize that, and that's kind of sad. I think it's also important when there's a failure that the leader help the staff member accept that failure and draw back as learning opportunities. So if they did not get the result that you were looking for, to really kind of turn that into a learning opportunity. Like, what was the shortcoming? What kind of training would you need to make sure that you're successful the next time? I think it's important that we create psychologically safe spaces for our employees, to destigmatize depression and addiction, provide opportunities for expression, mindfulness, and meditation. Next slide. So our leadership actually came up with two ideas that we had enforced during the pandemic, and especially last year. So if you remember, I mentioned Simon Sinek, who I follow pretty religiously, and he has a practice which he does at the beginning of the week called the huddle. And huddle is a great example to bring, your staff together to really talk about their accomplishments, what their challenges are for their week, and start to do like a grounding exercise. I think that the huddle is sort of exactly what it is in a sports way as well. Like, it's really kind of a cheerleading time for like the team, and working out some of the issues that they may have. The other thing we did is we did a 5-week mindfulness and meditation training, where we had an expert come in and talked about different mindfulness techniques that we could use in stressful situations, whether you're at home or whether you're out on the street or at work. And I think that we had sort of complemented by giving them these gift bags that help them practice mindfulness and meditation varies. So those are some of the things that we tried. Next slide. What are some of the other things that we could do? I mean, I think that it's important that we provide resources, not just mental health days, but online therapy sessions. I think it's also important that we foster an environment where people feel comfortable discussing personal problems, because a lot of times, if you live alone and you don't have a person to reach out to, I think your job becomes your entire life, and people that you work with become your support system. So I think that we need to leave the door open for people to feel comfortable talking about those personal issues. So those are some of the things that we have practiced at work, and some of the things that I think make for a caring leader. Showing concern and being authentic and genuine in that expression of concern and care for our employees, and as employees to not to be okay with taking a mental health day, and to take a moment for yourself and practice some things that whether they're micro or macro, that can make a difference for you and your well-being. Because I did not really want to go into all the health benefits, but the physical health benefits, but I think that the emotional health is what people just ignore. So it's really important to focus on the emotional health and well-being ourselves. Thank you. And here is my contact information if you want to reach out and chat after this program.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that was very inspiring. It was a nice reminder that everybody, when you said how many people multitask, we had everybody, yes, everyone is doing so many things at the same time. And it is a nice reminder to sit back and take and assess sometimes, and look at that better and see what you can do differently to make sure you don't overwhelm yourself and take on too much. And self-care is important. And I think as a library and community, I think it would be wonderful, and I'm sure most of you do it already, but to reach out to each other for these kinds of ideas and see, instead of just asking best practices for like the systems and all and the work stuff. I think it's a great idea for the leaders and managers to talk to each other about what are some of the best ways we can help each other to stay healthy and not overwhelmed, and get through this together. So I think that was really helpful, and we do encourage all of you to reach out to each other, to Elizabeth, to us, and ask us for advice or each other. And it's a great moment to stop and remind ourselves that yes, people are getting a little bit overwhelmed here and there, and we need to make sure that we don't minimize the importance of that. So thank you. I'm blessed and lucky because I get to work with Miriam, who reminds me at least 2 to 3 times a week to make sure I get enough sun and get outside. And so Miriam is perfect for that. And that is a nice reminder that I'm lucky to have my colleagues. And just to say, we missed the Ferguson Library. We missed seeing you at our event. So this was a really great treat for us.
Yes, yeah, we missed your events too.
Yeah, we've got some really nice comments that said, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing your expertise in this area, and some great resources. And so we thank you very much for being here today. It was a nice kind of like, moment to actually talk about self-care. Kind of felt like self-care. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
No, thank you, Miriam.
Good to see you. We'll see you soon.
All right, take care.
You too. All right, I'm going to do some back end stuff while we get our next speaker up here. Okay. Miriam, while I'm introducing Elizabeth, while I'm finding Elizabeth, maybe you can do her introduction.
Sure. We're so privileged to have with us also another special guest, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, who's the author of Becoming Heroines, Unleashing Our Power for Revolution and Rebirth. Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin is the CEO of Gaia Project Consulting, a worldwide executive coaching and consulting firm, as well as the founder of the Gaia Project for Women's Leadership. She's been featured in major media such as CNN, Forbes.com, the Huffington Post, and the New York Times. Elizabeth has taught courses to thousands of executives worldwide, including at Columbia Law School, and on behalf of Emerging Women Live. She speaks routinely in corporate and nonprofit environments. And here today she is joining us to speak about her book, Becoming Heroines. Welcome, Elizabeth.
I'm just going to jump on here to say, Elizabeth, we hope you can hear us. And if you could just turn your video back on and unmute yourself, and we will be ready for you. Yep, there you are. Hi.
Hi, welcome. So Elizabeth, I just wanted to open up with a general question of what inspired you to write your book. Oh, I think you're maybe on mute.
There we go. Got it. My apologies. I thought I was unmuted and I wasn't. Thanks for having me, first of all. And I'll just say that I think following on Elizabeth Joseph is really an interesting thing, because so much of my book is about avoiding the kind of lean in trajectory and really embracing different models of work. So there's a nice little intersection there with what she was sharing and, you know, some of the opening materials in my book. But what motivated me to write the book was that I had been doing work in more traditional corporate women's leadership for about 5 years preceding the 2016 election. And at the moment that Trump was elected, there was a real turning point in our work where so many women who I think had maybe been engaged but not activists, or engaged in, you know, traditional ideas of feminism but had not figured out how to apply them in their places of employment, started looking for ways of using their voices for change. And so our work took a little detour because we started doing more of an activist model of leadership training compared to what we had done historically. And we broadened our audience to include women who were running for office, women in nonprofit environments, as well as the more traditional corporate leadership structures. And around that time, my book agent, the wonderful Wendy Sherman, found me online and said, I really think you have this unique nexus, because I was a former Wall Street lawyer, so I'd done all the big corporate stuff. I'm also a lifelong activist. And then this work in particular really felt like it hit the moment. So the confluence of factors came together nicely with that. And, you know, a lot of the material that I share in the book is work that we've done with thousands of women around the world to really teach them how to uncover their gifts and work with their voices in public and private ways to create a better world.
Thank you. So in your book, you write that anyone who's ever been exposed to Greek mythology is aware of the hero's journey, and you add our story, the story of the heroine, is different. So why is that?
Well, you know, the historic myths of heroes are grounded in patriarchy. You know, often if you're familiar with the sort of trajectory of the hero's journey, you know, men strike out on a quest, usually motivated by a battle or a war, of which women are usually either the instigating cause or the spoils. They meet various challenges along the way. They uncover weapons, and they confront demons and sirens, and then they come home, you know, victorious, to enjoy the spoils of their victory, which also usually include women and land and the like. Our journey is different because our quest is often one to reclaim power that has been denied us. And as I talk in the book, one of the things that's also really fascinating, you know, again, this is sort of a generalization, but it's definitely true in my work with so many women over the last 10 years, our learning tends to be cyclical. And what I mean by that is that we face the same kinds of challenges, the same archetypes, even in some instances, because I've seen this happen with our clients, the same types of bosses over and over again in different employment or in different relationships. And each time we take a new layer of learning from those experiences until finally we're done with them. And so one of the things that I talk about in the book is that the nature of the heroine's journey is that once you step onto the path, you're never really off it. And I liken it in some ways to the idea of, that very famous, often overquoted, actually, quote from Martin Luther King, but it's relevant at this point, that the arc of history bends toward justice. And we're on that arc, and I don't think we ever really get off it once we stepped onto it. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. As you mentioned, your book aims to lead readers through the heroine's journey. And actually, you note that there are 4 stages of this cycle. Would you be able to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, sure. So the 4 stages, which make up the 4 sections of the book, are recognition. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on my second section, which is terrible, and I have it right behind me.
No worries.
Recognition, reconciliation, revolution, and rebirth. There we go. I have to apologize. I've done so many interviews about this in the last 4 weeks since the book came out that I just had a moment of so the recognition section of the book is really the moment of awakening, where we are confronted with an awareness that things cannot continue as they are. And that moment often propels us into the unknown, meaning that we know that we can't live with the conditions that we've been living with previously, but we're not really sure necessarily what the outcome of that is going to be. And as I discuss in the book, this moment of awakening is different for every person. I do think that for a lot of white middle-class American women, that moment was the election of Donald Trump. But obviously, there are so many reference points for this for others among us, right? Certainly the events in Ferguson, which were a catalyst point for the Black Lives Matter movement and brought us tremendous Black female activists to the forefront of our public consciousness, is another example of an event like that. The murder of George Floyd. There are various other events in our recent even cultural history that have propelled certain women, and I want to be really clear here. I define women, of course, as trans women and non-binary folks, and I say in the book this is really about like heroic feminine energy. So it's not just about the gender you're assigned at birth, but to me, it's really about that particular stage is really about understanding that something is being demanded of you in the context of an unacceptable circumstance. And you set off on that journey to see what comes next. Reconciliation is the second section of the book. And that part of the heroine's journey relates to how we reconcile with our own internalized trauma. That includes the trauma of being brought up in white supremacist patriarchy and what that means for how we've internalized certain messaging, and also how we have been used by white supremacist patriarchy to further its ends. So in particular, it talks about things like internalized oppression. And we have to come to terms also with the ways in which we've been traumatized. So this section of the book relates really to how we reconcile with ourselves and with the ways in which we have been used to further aims that are not in our best interests or in the interest of humanity in general. And it talks about how to have hard conversations and how to build intersectional community and the like. So that's the second section of the book. The third section of the book, the third stage of the heroine's journey, in my view, is revolution. And I always have to say to everyone that I'm not talking about like armed overthrow of the government, and I'm talking about revolution. It's really anchored in the original origins of the word, which are about revolving away from systems that no longer serve us. Revolving away from systemic oppression and institutionalized oppression and the manners in which it works on every aspect of our culture and our society. And, in particular, one thing that I just want to mention here is that in my view, revolution is not just about how we change culture, how we change the nation or the world. It also really has to be very personal, just in that way that Black womanist thought, Audre Lorde has already been cited today, brought us to the notion that the personal is always political. One of the things that I think is really key to where we are right now is that I think we have to understand that we are beyond the point of, in my view, of accepting things in our personal lives that we would not accept for others. And so that means you've got to bring the revolution home. That means that is in terms of childcare, it's in terms of housework. It's also in terms of the things that we might tolerate for ourselves that out in the world we advocate against. I have a very dear friend, Robin Runge, who is a Fulbright scholar in domestic violence, for instance. And one of the things that she talks about at length, and there's also citations to her in the book, is the fact that domestic violence touches every strata of society. And many of us know people, I myself have had experiences with domestic violence. Many of us know people who are even domestic violence advocates who in their own intimate lives may be experiencing it because it is a cycle of structural oppression, right? And so one of the notions in the book that relates to revolution for yourself is how we create the courage to create change in our most intimate spaces as well as out in the world. So that's revolution. And then the last section of the journey is rebirth. And really that's about how we create what Mariam Kaba refers to as an abolitionist mindset or an abolitionist imagination. It's really about the idea that we have to be working toward hope and toward freedom and toward joy at the same time that we are working to undermine structures of society that no longer work for us. And so that's a very visionary part of the book. It's also a very visionary part of the journey. And I also always have to say to folks that I'm very aware that, this work and this journey extends for all of us well beyond our lifetimes, but that doesn't mean the journey isn't worth it.
Thank you for that. Your book also includes some lessons and tools for the heroine that lives within each person. Would you be able to share an example or two from the book?
Sure. So one of the things that I talk about in the opening section of the book, that moment of recognition, is recognizing the narratives, for instance, that we tell ourselves about our own worthiness, about our own capacity to lead, those sort of internalized stories that have been created into, what we know in the leadership lingo as limiting beliefs or the like. I refer to them more broadly as the board of directors, the idea that we all have a certain set of characters living in our brains that we've adopted from the dominant culture, from our families of origin, from traumatic experiences that we may have had when we were younger. And part of our work in uncovering our gifts and finding ways to give back and live into new models of leadership is to unpack those and replace them with new mantras, new thought patterns, new structures and belief systems. So one of the exercises that I share in the book takes the reader, and these are exercises I've done with thousands of clients over the years, but takes the reader through the process of really naming one member of the board of directors and then going through what that board of director member says to us at moments of challenge or crisis. And those voices can often be incredibly abusive, like the ways that we talk to ourselves. This is always one of the more shocking parts of the work that I've done with really successful women in particular, how nonetheless our internal voices can be just so oppressive and challenging to face down. And so the exercises that I take people through involve really like offloading that, writing it all down, challenging confirmation bias by really evaluating from like a 30,000 foot view. Are these things that I am telling myself, are these things that I believe about the way the world works actually true? Do I have evidence that contradicts them? And then working to build replacement mantras to take over the space of those limiting beliefs that we know are false. And this work is not easy. The remark I always get when I do this in group courses or for people who have read the first section of the book is like, wow, this is really challenging. But on the other side of it, you find that, much of what we've been carrying around that we believe is personal, that we believe is about ourselves and our own capacity and our worthiness is actually patriarchy and white supremacy in many instances speaking to us. And we've just done the work of those structures of oppression for them by bringing them into our own brains. And so part of the work here is about understanding that there is baggage that is not yours to carry. There's baggage that actually has nothing to do with you, that you are hauling around in every aspect of what you're doing. And once you're able to really offload that through the work that I describe in the book, it becomes much easier to then go on to offer your gifts back to the collective, which is, by the way, the spoils place of the heroine's journey, in my opinion. We tell our stories, we overcome together, we work in community. All of that becomes much more possible.
Wow, that's powerful. One of my colleagues, Erica Melnichuk, in reading your book, mentioned that you're so knowledgeable about so many DE&I initiatives, and she was particularly interested to hear about Latasha Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And could you speak a little bit about her work?
Yeah, so Latasha Brown, as I think a lot of people know at this point, is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. I met Latasha, I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago now, at an event called Black Women's Roundtable that is hosted by the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. I was invited to go by someone on their board and spent 4 days as the only white woman in a room of like 300 of the most powerful Black female activists in the nation, which was amazing. I mean, I really spent the whole time just sitting there listening. So Latasha was one of the panelists at that event. And this was before she had sort of like, I don't know, I don't think she really relishes the fame, but before her work had become as well known as it is right now. And we kind of struck up a friendship and a common goal during that time. It was really shortly after the 2016 election, like maybe 16, 18 months after. And both of us were doing activist work to try to mobilize our own communities. And we became friends. And Latasha's magic. I don't know that there's really any other way to describe it than that. She is in addition to the fact that she has this incredible capacity to motivate and inspire, she also does everything that she does, even under the most dire conditions, from a place of joy. And she really believes in joy being a part of the work that she does. And I've learned so much from her about not just joy and love as organizing principles, but also about revolutionary rest. There was an event in 2019 where a point where I was really like breaking down from doing all this public activist work that is a part of what we do now. And she reached out to me and said, you have to take a break. She's like, I know it may feel like everything is urgent, but the way that she put it to me, and I quote the conversation verbatim in the book, is that, our battle is long and we will win eventually, but our battle is long. And we have to understand that in order to create the endurance and combat the nature of what we're facing, we've also really got to prioritize ourselves. And so this is one reason why everything Elizabeth Joseph just said on your presentation is so relevant to me, because in order for us to continue in the critical roles that we have in the world, and I think librarians are like an anchor point to this. I mean, it's so critical. I think about my own children. I think about the libraries of my youth. I think about the way in which libraries are community gathering centers for so many people. And, the point that was made about, being a social worker as well as a librarian is really relevant, and I feel that in my heart, right? So to me, part of this has to be about recognizing that, and this is such a big takeaway from Latasha, that if we do not carve out the space to get grounded and to be in intimate relationships and to do all those things that were on that wheel, we'll break down and we will be crushed by what we're facing. So Latasha is just a massive inspiration to me and a dear friend, and also someone who reminds me not to be too scared when it seems like everything is falling apart. I interviewed her in 2019 as well for a program that we were trying at the time to kind of like sell to Netflix. And somewhere on video, I have this incredible conversation with her where she said to me, I'm actually really not afraid of it all falling apart, because if what happens is that our systems collapse, that creates fertile ground for us to build a better world and to actually live into ideals that America has claimed to stand for, but never has. And I think about that a lot these days. We're all at points of crisis, and so much is not as we thought it would be. And as we want it to be, and that notion and the teachings that she offers while still doing the work really keep me very grounded.
Oh, that's wonderful. So just one final question. What brings you joy?
That's a great question. It's funny because somebody asked me not all that long ago, like what my days look like now, because I'm a single mother of two kids, a 9 and an 8-year-old, one of whom is non-binary and just came out. So that's been kind of an interesting journey. And somebody asked me like, what do you do for fun? And I was like, fun? Like in this day and age, it's all kind of, it's been 19 months inside with my children. They've only now returned to public school. The idea of joy for me has been sort of nebulous, but I will tell you that I find tremendous joy right now in books, which will not surprise anybody who's here. One of the things that I've really consciously chosen to do over the last 3 or 4 months or so is to carve out time every day for reading. And I have found myself returning to some of the books, like I have one right in front of me here now. It's All About Love by Bell Hooks, which I have read 3 times as an adult. I find myself really returning to some of the books that were foundational to my activist work when I was much younger. And that is really helping to keep me kind of centered. But I will also say that, getting my son back to soccer, where I can sit on the side of the field and watch him run around with all of his friends, albeit with a mask on, and there's joy and there's normalcy attached to it. And there's sunshine here in Southern California, that to me is also just a moment of pleasure, right? Because my kid is happy and therefore I'm happy. And it's a moment of like escaping from the daily experiences that we're all living through right now. So I would point to that, books and my kids are always a good source of joy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us. Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. Her book is Becoming Heroines, Unleashing Our Power for Revolution and Rebirth, and it is published by Portfolio and available now.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here today, Elizabeth. That was very inspiring, and we thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so we were supposed to have one final author for you today, but she is a very busy woman, and she is actually had to catch a plane. So what she did was she sent a pre-recorded video with her whole presentation, which you will see here, is called Showing More Heart at Work, How to Attract and Retain Top Talent by Putting Your People First. The tiny URL is on the screen. It will also be in the wrap-up report. Heather Younger is the founder and the CEO of Employee Fanatics, an organization dedicated to inspiring and training leaders to put their employees first. I will tell you that her presentation is about 12 minutes long. It's very inspiring and uplifting and really just reminds managers and leadership people at the top that you can do all of the right things, but if you don't actually care about your employees, they're never going to work. So she's very practical, and also she'll give some resources in her talk where at the end you can go in and you can go to her website, and there's a self-assessment test that she really encourages people to take to see, to test their leadership skills. And she's very inspiring and refreshing. So we hope that you will take a moment to view her presentation, and we are sorry that she couldn't make it today, but we thank you for joining us for such an inspiring conversation. Miriam, thank you so much as always for helping put this together. We loved hearing from our friends at the Ferguson Library and from the author as well. So we also just want to let you know, because you're librarians, we can't let you get away without talking about some of our favorite books, Future Reading for Leadership and Management. And this collection of books will also be in the wrap-up report. And there's some really great ones on here, like The High Five Habit. In her global phenomenon, The 5-Second Rule, Mel Robbins taught millions of people around the world the 5-second secret to motivation. Now she's back with another simple, proven tool you can take control of your life, the High Five Habit. So this is a really fun book. Don't let the title fool you. This isn't a book about high-fiving everyone else in your life. You're already doing that, cheering for your favorite team, celebrating your friends, supporting the people you love as they go after what they want in life. Imagine if you gave that same love and encouragement to yourself, or even better, you made it a daily habit. So you'd be unstoppable. And that's a great book from Mel Robbins. And one other one we just wanted to point out was Out of Office. a future-looking, game-changing book from two leading cultural reporters about the radical and transformational potential of working from home. We know that, that's what a lot of people are doing now. And as managers and leaders, you want to be prepared to have these motivational and inspiring talks with your employees. So there's more titles on this page that I'm sure you will all love, but we just wanted to point a few out. And we thank you so much for joining us. We encourage you to join us next time. And it will already be November. I can't believe it. For what I think is going to be an especially fun episode, where we are going to get some cookbook authors tips for you to get ready for the holiday season, to take a good look at your cookbook collections. And we are going to be hearing from the Philadelphia Free Library. And as you all know, they have a wonderful cooking program in their library. So that will be really fun. So we encourage you to register for that. And as always, thank you for joining us. Miriam, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kelly.
Have a great day. Yeah, thank you. Have a great day. And don't forget, everybody, take a minute to relax and to meditate, or whatever it is that gives you a moment to relax and get through the day and get some sun, as Miriam would say. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.